Hi, welcome to Antioch Center for the Nations. We're continuing with the series Journey with Moses. And the last time we were together, we were getting into some of the laws. We're going to continue in that vein, talking about the different laws and looking at some of the inferences of those laws in our lives today. And we left off talking about number 200, which was the liability for animal behavior. If a bull gores a man or woman to death, the bull is to be stoned to death, and its meat must not be eaten, but the owner of the bull will not be held responsible. If, however, the bull has had the habit of goring and the owner has not warned, but has not kept it, or the warner was warned by someone but did not keep it penned up, and it kills a man or a woman, then the bull is to be stoned and its owner also to be put to death. In other words, you are liable for this animal. However, if payment is demanded, the owner may redeem his life by the payment of whatever is demanded. The law also applies if the bull gores a son or a daughter. If the bull gores a male or female slave, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver to the master of the slave, and the bull is to be stoned to death. So here, this wild bull or this ox that you have pinned up, if you know that it has this habit of doing it, but you do not, you've been warned by people and you are not cautious with it, then it's your responsibility. And we talked about that last time and how this is applied to our life today. Our life today is if you have a dog, if you have a cat that scratches people, and et cetera, whatever you have. If you have a car that has an issue and a problem, and you know about it, and somebody gets in the car, and it applies to all those realms, and many of the laws we have today surround that premise. Now we go to number 201, liability for uncovered pits. And this is connected also to the issues of liability. It says in Exodus 21:33, if anyone uncovers a pit or digs one and fails to cover it, and an ox or donkey falls into it, the one who opened the pit must pay the owner for the loss and take the dead animal in exchange. So let's say that you are building a cistern and in a storage bin of sorts, because cisterns were subterranean storage facilities. If you're building that and you begin the digging but you don't finish it, and you do not cover it up carefully, and in the night or when someone cannot see, an animal comes along and falls into that hole and dies, and you are responsible because of the liability of having left an open hole in the ground. So this is anything you leave that is dangerous. You are responsible for that. Number 202, liability for animals' malgovernance. In other words, you don't take care of your animal. If anyone's bull injures someone else's bull and it dies, the two parties are to sell the live one and divide both the money and the dead animal equally. Let's say there's two bulls in a field, one jumps a fence or something like that, and the bulls fight, but they're owned by different people. Maybe you're grazing in the same public space. They fight and one kills the other, well then there's an equal share. Your bull, even is the winner, you have to slaughter that bull and give half the meat plus half the value of the animal to the other man. However, if it was known that the bull had the habit of goring other bulls, yet the owner did not keep it penned up, the owner must pay animal for animal and take the dead animal in exchange. So here the person then, if this happens, you take the animal and you have to give your animal for the animal that you have taken, because you are responsible for this. And this is, I liken it to if I'm going to visit someone's house and I have an unruly child, and I know that my child has a habit of knocking things over, and they knock a television set off a wall. Well, if I knew that my child was unruly, I am liable to pay for that television in that person's house where I'm visiting, or in a shopping mall for that matter, or wherever we go. I should have control over my child. I should have my child governed. It was the same with animals with the Israelites. Now, this is a deep issue because very often people will do something out of recklessness and just say, oh, well, I'm sorry. But that's not enough compensation if you have lost something. I believe that As it says, you must pay animal for animal. And I know the principle eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc., etc. I think it's a good rule that if you damage something, it must be replaced. And that's what most lawsuits are about, where loss has been incurred by something. Number 203, law for animal theft. Whoever steals an ox or sheep and slaughters it or sells it must pay back or pay 5 head of cattle for the oxen and 4 sheep for the sheep. So if you steal someone's cattle, you steal their bull or their cow and you eat it and you get caught. Of course, if you don't get caught, they don't know who did it, but they do track you down. They find that you're the one that did it. Well, then you owe 5 bulls in the place of that one as a punitive measure to punish you for having the disregard for your neighbor by stealing their animal. Same with sheep, but with sheep, you have to pay back 4. Why 5 head of cattle and only 4 sheep instead of 5 sheep? I don't know, but I do find it interesting that you would have to pay something beyond the value of the animal that you have stolen. I wish it was like that today. Imagine if someone steals something that belongs to you. They steal your iPhone and they get caught. Imagine if the sentence was that they simply had to pay you back 5 iPhones. Be a pretty good deal, or at least the value of 5 iPhones. It would be able to keep a harmony in society. Number 204, we see the law for thieves caught. If a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. Anyone who steals must certainly make restitution. But if they have nothing, they must be sold to pay for their theft. If the stolen animal is found alive in their possession, whether ox or donkey or sheep, they must pay back double. So this is the case of a thief. He's breaking in at night. And let's say that you're laying in your bed with your husband or your wife. If you're laying there with your family, your children are safe, you hear a noise and you wake up in the dark and a thief has broken into your house, breaking and entering into your house, and you beat him with a club and he dies, you're not guilty. It is your right to defend yourself. But if it happens after sunrise, in other words, if it's light and you can see, then the defender is guilty of bloodshed. Anyone who steals must certainly make restitution. In other words, you catching the person should apprehend him and cause a council of people to decide what he should pay back, depending on what he's stealing. And that would be the punishment for him. But if you beat him to death in broad daylight or after the sun has risen, then you are guilty of bloodshed. But if he comes in at night, and you know this law still applies in many realms. This law applies, I know, in my home country, the United States. If somebody breaks into your house and you, well, of course we have guns in the U.S., and you shoot that man, you have a right, you will not be guilty. It will be investigated, of course. They have to verify that you did not know this individual and that there was no premeditated ideas of entrapment or maybe luring this guy into your house. In other words, it has to be proven. They have to see some evidence of breaking and entering and theft to prove if you've shot him dead or if you killed him by beating him with a golf club, anything, then you're not guilty for that because he broke in. But in the U.S., I believe there's a modification of this even during the day if someone breaks into your house, day or night. Law for thieves caught. But they must pay back double if the animal is found alive in their possession. And it's interesting because there are different amounts of payment that must take place for different reasons. 205, law for uncontrolled animal grazing. If anyone grazes their livestock in a field or vineyard and lets them stray, and they graze in someone else's field, the offender must make restitution for the best of their own field or vineyard. Now, of course, you have a barley patch and your neighbor's animal comes over into your fenced region and eats your barley up. It is quantifiable. You can find out exactly how much barley the animal has consumed and measure it and then calculate the value of it at market at the time of harvest. And so that is what must be given to you, the best of their own field or vineyard. In other words, the individual, it may have to wait for harvest when the barley or the wheat is completely in fruition and they harvest it. It should be calculated by the space that was consumed. If you had sown a certain square meter area and that's what the animal ate, that's what must be given back to you. So this is, once again, the food for the food, what was taken or eaten by this animal. It just keeps things fair. Otherwise, people will just allow their animals to go and eat anywhere. This is to protect each other so that you can live at peace with your neighbors. And this is why Jesus really came up with the conclusion that the summation of the entire law is love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. If your animal ate some of their wheat, you should immediately feel like you need to compensate them for that wheat and give back to them. And this works in a broad spectrum in all relationships, the way that we relate to people. If we've done something wrong to someone, if we've offended someone, we need to consider what would we like done to us? What would be the compensation to us? And then make sure that we measure that out. Law for arson we see here in verse 6 of chapter 22. If a fire breaks out and spreads into thorn bushes so that it burns shocks of grain and standing grain, or the whole field, which is like a farmer's nightmare, the one who started the fire must make restitution, whether they started this fire on purpose or on accident. Let's say that you're having a party at your house next to your neighbor, the farmer's field, and embers rise up from your bonfire and land in his field and catch it on fire. That's your responsibility, and you are liable for that if it can be proven, of course. And this is the same as it is today. If you have an electrical fire in your house and it burns through a wall and burns up your neighbor's goods, then you are liable for that as well if it is from your apparatus or your house that happens. Now, one of the things that can help us with this is insurance. This is why people get insurance, so that if there is a mishap or something, you have the wherewithal to pay and compensate by law the things that have been taken or things that are missing. Number 207, law for responsibility of keeping goods. Now, this is very interesting to me because we often borrow one another's things. I may borrow your computer, I may borrow your speakers, I may borrow your car. And there are liabilities concerning this. So many wars or battles have come between friends because things were mishandled in someone else's possession. So this is quite interesting. In verse 7, if anyone gives a neighbor silver or goods for safekeeping, in other words, you have something valuable, and maybe you are going on a trip, and you bring this valuable thing to, I don't know, maybe my harmonica. I value this harmonica, and I give it to you and say, look, I'm going to be gone for a while. Can you keep this safe at your house? And you say, sure, and you take it. And now, if they are stolen from the neighbor's house, that means that while you are watching my harmonica, somebody breaks into your house and steals it. The thief, if caught, must pay back double. I get 2 harmonicas back. Although it was at your house, I gave it to you for safekeeping. The thief breaks in, but you catch the thief, he's forced to then buy me a second harmonica. But if the thief is not found, and the owner of the house must appear before the judges, and they must determine whether the owner of the house has laid hands on the other person's property. Like, what if he took the harmonica? Well, they're going to investigate and find out. What if he said a thief came and stole it, but in fact he took it himself? These are the things that people do. So it has to be investigated. In all cases of illegal possession of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, a garment, or any other lost property about which somebody says, this is mine, both parties are to bring their cases before the judges. And the one whom the judges declare guilty must pay back double to the other. And now this starts to make sense when you consider Solomon's wise decree with the 2 women and the baby. And one said that the baby she had killed her baby in the night on accident. When her baby died, she woke up and she exchanged the dead baby for the living baby, and they were living in the same space. And she knew that that was not her baby that was dead with her. And they brought this issue to the king, and the king said, well, let's just cut the baby in half. And the real mother said, no, give the baby to her. And that way, the great wisdom of Solomon. But he was judging Israel according to these laws of, if they're both parties, are to bring their cases before the judges. They brought it before King Solomon in that case. And the one whom the judge declares guilty must pay back double to the other. That is the way the law works, and that's the way courts work. And I'm sure back then, just like now, people settled out of court too. In other words, they made decisions together to avoid having to go to court. But the bottom line is, if I give you my good to watch, and if I accept something from you, so that's the thing. I'm not really into watching someone's possessions for this reason. And you should be very careful about watching someone's possessions. In other words, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, can you take care of my dog or my jewelry or whatever the case, can you watch my car? You need to think long and hard before you take that or borrow it in that case, which we're going to see more in a moment. Before you ever even do that, you have to consider some important things in the worst case scenario. If it is stolen, if you do break it, if I'm going to borrow or something is given to me to take care of, do I want to take that responsibility? So there's many laws like this. The law of responsibility of keeping animals in general. We see in verse 10, if anyone gives a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any other animal to their neighbor for safekeeping, and it dies or is injured or is taken away while no one is looking, the issue between them will be settled by the taking of an oath before the Lord that the neighbor did not lay hands on the other person's property. This is what you see in the movies when you put your hand on the Bible and do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. And in that moment, that's what this is talking about. You swear to tell the truth. And if you do that, then the Lord, it says, you say this before the Lord, and the neighbor did not lay hands on the other person's property. The owner is to accept it. And no restitution is required. But if the animal was stolen from the neighbor, restitution must be made to the owner. If it was torn to pieces by a wild animal, the neighbor shall bring the remains as evidence and shall not be required to pay for the torn animal. In other words, they're trying to eradicate any possibility that someone is going to do a sneaky thing and lie to someone about something lent to them. Law of borrowing. If anyone borrows an animal from their neighbor, and it is injured or dies while the owner is not present, they must make restitution. But if the owner is with the animal, the borrower will not have to pay. If the animal was hired, the money paid for the hire covers the loss. And this is really interesting. You can apply this to rental cars. When I travel to other countries, I often rent a car, and you have insurance for that in case something happens, because you are liable for that thing you have rented or you have borrowed. But the payment for the rental is the cover, or it should be the insurance to cover for those liabilities. And they have a contract you sign when you rent that car. So that's not a new law. That's right here in the Bible when it comes to you using animals. But if someone had their ox and they're with that ox helping you plow your field because your ox is too young or your ox died, and something happens to his ox while he's there, well, that's still on him because he's present with it. But if you borrowed and used it and something happens, that's where you have to make restitution. You have to be responsible for what you are borrowing. If I borrow your leather coat because I'm going on a winter trip, and while I'm there, I burn it in a fire, I don't bring back a burnt leather coat to you and say, here's your coat, thanks, sorry about that. No, I have to get you a replacement coat. That is my responsibility. I have to make restitution. And there are people who do not believe this. There are people who will just say sorry and give you back the thing that they've ruined. But the fact is, when you're borrowing something, when it's in your possession, otherwise don't borrow it. And this is what I say has to be the mentality. Something to keep us safe is, if I want to borrow something from you, I have to consider, do I have the wherewithal, the finances, whatever, to pay you back for that item or replace it entirely? And if I do not, then I should not borrow it. You understand? And or get insurance that will pay if it is lost, which you can do. But in that case, then don't borrow it. I'm not going to borrow something from you. Even if you say, hey, why don't you use my whatever? Hey, use this camera, and you give me a Leica that cost $20,000 for one camera. I'm not going to borrow that camera. No, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it, but I'm not going to borrow that camera. Why? Because I don't have the $20,000 to replace that camera. You understand? And nor do I want to be under the pressure of having to make restitution for such an item. But anyway, if you're there present with me and you hand me your Leica and say, take a picture with this, and I take a picture, and in between us while you're taking it back, it falls and hits the ground, that is more like this law again. So these are foundational truths in many societies, in many places that we have to consider that are in these laws. Law for promiscuity. If a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the bride price, and she shall be his wife. In other words, in this case, it's consensual, and he is flirting with this virgin, but he was not engaged to her. So they go on a date and they end up sleeping together and having physical relations. Well, when this is found out, he needs to marry her. Imagine if that happened today. First of all, it would solve a lot of issues with the problems of promiscuity. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must pay the bride price for virgins. You understand? In other words, the father, you are the man, you've seduced this daughter, and you slept together, and that comes out, and the father finds out about it, but he does not like you, and he doesn't want you to marry this daughter, then you have to pay the bride price for virgins. And that was measured according to the culture and the standard of the day. In other words, the money, the bride price is the money and dowry that is paid. That is lost. In other words, that person will not gain that, and so you have to replace it. If they can't engage in the marriage covenant with another family, see, often marriages took place for alliances in business and politics and etc. Still does to this day, by the way. But in this case, if you seduce a girl and you sleep with her, you got to marry her. It's a shotgun wedding mentality. Number 211, death to sorcerers. Very simple about people practicing divination and sorcery. Do not allow a sorceress to live. And in this case, it's a female. But it also counts for a male, but it's just naming a sorceress, someone who is operating in witchcraft. Imagine if this law were used today, there would be a lot of executions going on. But that's just what the Bible said in its time. Verse 19, law for bestiality. This is disgusting, but here it is. Anyone who has sexual relations with an animal is to be put to death. So it's the death penalty for having sex with an animal. Ew. Okay. Number 213, law for sacrifices to false gods. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord must be destroyed. So this is for the Israelites in the Israelite camp. Obviously, these laws could not be enforced when the Israelites were in mixed populations. Think about the Romans. The day of Jesus, this law obviously could not be applied to any of the Romans, but it could to the Jews. And that's why the Sanhedrin was a Jewish court in operation under the control of the Roman government, because they had to deal with rules like this. It's not much different than it is here in Singapore when it comes to Muslim population in the nation of Singapore. There is a court of Islam that they have to answer to certain religious laws if they are legally, in fact, Muslims. And that's where the issue of conversion comes up. But anyway, long story short, sacrificing any god other than the Lord, you must be destroyed. Number 214, prohibition of mistreatment of foreigners. I like this one because I have lived my life as a foreigner for so long. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner. I would say that of all the nations I've been in, it's been good, but yeah, sometimes I have been mistreated. There is some forms of oppression, not beaten, not right, but certainly always prejudiced, always thought of as an outsider. And that's okay. I get that I'm a sojourner in a foreign land. This should be a standard idea that we have. But in most cases, the people in the nations I've been do not mistreat me or oppress me. In fact, they welcome me and love me, and I'm grateful for that. But God did not want his people to mistreat the foreigners and those that were with them that were from other lands. But you'd have to treat them amicably and kindly. Warning of abuse of orphans and widows. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do, and they cry out to me, says God, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless. Ouch! So, God cares for orphans, and God cares for widows. And you think, who would take advantage of widows? My gosh, these days cyber crimes are an all-time record high, and there are whole groups in nations that have call centers that target specifically widows to extort them and steal their money from them. And God, this law says it, God takes this seriously. His anger is aroused. I would sure not want to be the guy in the call center that has run a scam on an old widow and has stolen and taken from her. I know a widow to whom this has happened, and I promise you that God's anger is aroused, and that person that has done this will suffer dearly, and their wives and their children will become fatherless, and their wives will be widows, and it is in the law of God. I pray for mercy. God, have mercy on the souls of the people who have mistreated a widow. God does not like it. Law against interest in loans to fellow Israelites. Now, this one's funny because it says, if you lend money to one of my people, an Israelite, among you who is needy, person needs, so you lend the money. Do not treat it like a business deal. In other words, it's not a bank transaction. Charge no interest. In other words, amongst the Israelites, if you lent a fellow Jew $1,000, they would pay you back the $1,000, but there would be no points of interest. The time they could pay you back, they pay you back, but they would pay you back only the $1,000 that you lent them. You could not legally charge interest to them. Imagine if that were true today. I don't know how. I guess I would have to speak to some rabbis or some Jews, but to this day, of course, Jews borrowing money from Jews today in the banking industry pay interest. But this is what it says. And it does not say that you can't charge interest to a foreigner. So there are some differences. Number 217, regulations for collateral. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it by sunset, because that cloak is the only covering your neighbor has. What else can they sleep in? When they cry out to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. This cloak that it's referring to was a very big garment, and it was a very valuable piece of a garment, very expensive. You did not have many of these, and families often slept together, children in the bed with the mother and the father. And this cloak was a massive covering that could cover everyone in the bed to keep them warm. And because it was so valuable, if you did go into a deal with someone, you could take as collateral, as proof of a loan, you could take the cloak, but you would have to return the cloak at night to the neighbor for them to use during the cold hours of night. Then you could pick it back up in the morning. But the need for them to stay warm God was concerned about. So there's regulations about that. Fascinating. Prohibition of blasphemy and cursing rulers. It says, do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. Of course, the blaspheming of God we understand, but the cursing of the rulers of the people, I don't know. I hear it very often. We should not. I may not like the politics of people in my nation. I may not always like different presidents or governors or etc., but to curse them, I don't think that God is happy with that. I can pray for them and I can ask God to deal with them, but I cannot call a curse down upon them, and I certainly cannot blaspheme God. Number 219, law of offerings owed to God. Do not hold back offerings from your granaries or your vats. You must give me the firstborn of your sons. Do the same with your cattle and your sheep. Let them stay with their mothers for 7 days, but give them to me on the 8th day. These were the embedded laws of the principle, first fruits and the tithes and all of those things. Don't hold it back. I think of Malachi chapter 3, would a man rob God? You've robbed me in tithes and offerings, it said. God has a deal he makes with us conforming to the laws of reciprocity. We must give the first fruits to God. Amen? Okay, we're going to stop here because we're out of time, but I look forward to seeing you. We're going to continue with these laws. I find them interesting. I hope you're enjoying them as well. Until next time, God bless you. Thank you for joining me.